Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for SF Doc Fest. The festival will run from June 1st through 11th, here digitally in your computer screens and in person at the Historic Roxy Theater in San Francisco. I would love to welcome our filmmakers here from our Dare to Rise Shorts program. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us. I'm Sarah Flores, and I would love to kick things off by introducing our filmmakers. If you could just let us know your name, the film you're here with, and what your role was on the film, and we'll kick it off with Sinead.
Hi, I'm Sinead. I'm the director of Band Book Club.
Thanks so much. Jassy, hi, welcome.
Hi, yeah, my name is Jassy. I'm actually one of the protagonists of the film Chokehold and one of the producers of Chokehold, a live show.
Thanks so much for joining us. Hi, Claudia, welcome.
Hi, my name is Claudia, and I am the co-director and co-writer of Pei Leap Into the Sky, Black Girl.
Thank you so much. Welcome, George.
Hi, I'm George Larkin, and I wrote, directed, and edited a short doc called The Exchange Girl.
Lovely. Thanks so much for joining us. And last but not least, hi, Luis. Hello.
Hello, I'm Luis Modonet, and I'm one of the directors of The Ink Islands. I directed alongside Yuri Salis, and glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you. Thank you, everybody. Just to kind of dive in, I would just love to hear what the genesis is of your story. Like, how did you come to find your subject and get involved with telling it? And we'll come back to Sinead. Hi.
Hello. Yeah, I was finishing up grad school in Austin, Texas, and I had heard rumblings about the book banning that was going on there. And this list of books went out. It was 850 books, and it kind of set off this flurry of inquiries and books being removed from classrooms, libraries, and kind of all different places in Texas. During my research, I found this club of teenage girls who are working on getting books put back into their classroom libraries by reading them and discussing them and petitioning their school. So they're very cool kids, and the work they're doing is really cool, really important. And yeah, they're just so cool and so much cooler than I was at 16. So it was truly a great pleasure to work with them.
Yeah, I mean, and also just so articulate, right? Like to think about the younger generations, just like encouraging like rational discussion about things that feel controversial is insane. That's so cool. Thank you so much for sharing this story. Jassy, can you talk about kind of how you came to be involved? Like obviously, you guys have been doing your wrestling performances before the film came about, but like how did you get involved with it? How did you become a producer, and how did you decide to document this journey?
Yeah, it actually started me and two of my friends kind of just started doing these monthly drag shows in New Orleans. And they were always had kind of silly, crazy themes. We decided to do a wrestling show on the floor of a bar one month, and it really became like an overnight hit in New Orleans. And so we eventually kind of kept with that theme and kept it growing, and brought it to like underground DIY warehouse spaces. And yeah, it was like an immediate success, and we immediately kind of found people who are interested in wanting us to do it more and bring it to bigger and larger spaces. And then once COVID hit, we kind of lost our space. We hadn't done the show in a couple of years. And Yoni, the filmmaker who was living in Berlin at the time, he heard about us and wanted to kind of bring us out of this DIY space into a more professional art environment. And so he, had the idea for the film and helped us secure grants to go over to Germany. And we were sponsored by Kampfnagel in Hamburg. And yeah, they really helped us take us to the next level. And it's been amazing ever since.
Yeah, like honestly, it's just cool in general, right? But there's something so revolutionary about like queering or re-queering the wrestling space. But I really love how the film approaches that. It's rad. Thank you
Yeah,
so
once we
much.
started wrestling, we really realized how similar drag and wrestling are. You know, they're both
Yeah,
so character
totally.
focused. They're both
It's so
so
theatrical.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
it was really, really rad. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Claudia, like how, I mean, I think like this was maybe something within your community already, the kind of AMPI, but thank you so much for telling the story and like showing like an unlikely connection that you wouldn't think about if you're not from within that community. So can you just, how did you decide to bring this to the screen, or like what was your history within the AMPI community?
Yeah, so in Columbus, Ohio, there are over 10,000 Ghanaian immigrants. And so during COVID, a few friends and I, we were just like, let's gather, let's have a picnic. And so at the picnic, we started playing Ampe, and it was really cool to see these like otherwise reserved Black girls sort of like break out of their shells and just get all up in each other's faces and get very, performative, accusatory, defensive, etc. And so just a few days after playing the game, I called my co-director Ife, who's also my friend, and I was like, we should do something about this. And just from then on, I think that's really where the idea began, with shooting in Columbus, Ohio, and then also Accra, Ghana, to think about the formative experiences of Black girlhood through the lens of play.
It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. George, I'm so struck by the exchange goal. I personally kind of came up as a film historian. I did my undergraduate thesis on Alice Guy Blaché, which nobody knows, but she was the first person to start a studio. She is arguably came before Georges Méliès as the first narrative film director. So I really loved the story that you present in The Exchange Girl, and kind of looking at the roots of women's labor within the film industry, kind of the dangers of that, and how one might go about advancing their career at this time when women had largely been blocked from working within film. So if you could, how did you, I mean, I know this is a ongoing kind of didactic process for you, but can you talk about how you discovered this story and decided to make this film?
Sure. I actually came across this group of women who worked in post-production as I was finishing up a book with Routledge. And I soon became fascinated about their stories, the 20s, and these women were working in these highly dangerous conditions. And out of their ranks sprang a few legends. And so I didn't know much about them. I started to dig more, and I found work in archives, and I found them in hiding in plain sight. There would be these studio industrial films where studios would put out films about themselves, and it'd be basically 99% men and then actresses, and then like a 3-second shot of these women working in these dark, dangerous rooms. And I wanted to find out more about their story. I actually started in indie film in the 90s, and I started during the transition to digital in post, and I saw a lot of people lose jobs and careers, and we were doing indie films on films with like Ben Stiller and David Russell and Scarlett Johansson. So it's a fascinating transitional time as some people gained careers and some people lost careers. And so as I was doing my doctorate at Berkeley, I came upon this group that really lost their careers, and in some cases their lives, as film transitioned to sound. So for me, it just became a lot about my own career, but frankly in a much more meaningful way, because of the dangerous conditions that they worked in. But again, the hopeful part of the story is that out of the ranks sprang some legendary editors. So that's the path that I followed for this short doc.
Amazing. Thank you so much for highlighting, right? We still haven't reached true parity within this industry. And it's important to kind of talk about the legacy that's often like not spoken of within the business of show. So thank you so much. Hi, Luis. Can you tell us kind of how you found the story behind the ink element and brought it to the screen?
Yeah, we were living under Bolsonaro administration here in Brazil, and it was really tough times for culture and human rights and sustainability, and just like difficult times overall. And then we had this access to the story of the staggers, which we were following them, we were investigating tagging and the cultural meaning of tagging, and how tagging was a bridge to pass on a message that came from the outskirts to the city centers, and how outskirts in Brazil and in São Paulo specifically are so far away and so out of reach. And we had the opportunity, after months of approximation and investigating tagging, we had the opportunity to follow them in an act against the Bolsonaro administration. And I think that this was the starting point for our film, like this connection of the staggers. And from there on, we tried to lead a discussion about the difference of the outskirts and the city centers, and how the messages of the outskirts are hard to reach the city centers, and the city centers were historically a place that neglected the outskirts culture. And I think that this was the starting point for our film. And well, from there on, it was just the adventure of following this group of taggers, doing something that was against the law, but at that moment felt so right, to go against the Bolsonaro government. And well, I think the starting point was that.
Wow. Thank you so much. Like, honestly, I feel like your film provides such an inside look that you don't often see. Obviously, like graffiti is such like an underground thing that you don't really always get an access point to, but it is also like a symbol of revolution and resistance. And I think that you really touched upon that really lovely in your film.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that you said a good word to talk about the film. It's resistance, and thinking about how the outskirts in São Paulo is historically a resistance, culture of resistance, and
Yeah.
well, just glad to see that it's getting to broader audience. Nice.
100%. I mean, San Francisco is a great, well, in some ways, a great space to kind of analyze the way you express those themes throughout public spaces and in a subversive way. So thank you so
Yeah.
much. Speaking of subversion, Sinead, I'm just so awestruck by the brilliance of these young women. And I was wondering if you could talk about what it was like to work with them and kind of help them tell this story.
Working with them was fantastic. Honestly, if you have the opportunity to make a documentary with teenage girls who are as brilliant and well organized and motivated as them, fantastic opportunity. So diligent in every part of collaboration. But yeah, when I started researching the project, I realized that a lot of these conversations about books and what content's appropriate for people of various ages and what content they should be engaging with and what they're able to process and understand and what support they need for processing and understanding, all those discussions were happening above their heads. And no one was engaging with the kids to ask if they were comfortable with the content, how they felt about it, how important they felt that it was to see themselves represented in literature from early ages, and how books can be a passageway to understanding other people's lives and experiences. So that was kind of my entry point, was that to show that these kids are able to have these like brilliant discussions. They're so smart, they're so funny. And the things in these books that might make them uncomfortable, they work through together. They talk about and they process, and they come away with a better understanding of other people, which I think is something that, we could all try a bit harder. And there's something so earnest about the act of actually reading these books instead of just talking about them in theoretical terms of what might be offensive to someone, and kind of the politicization of these books without engaging really with the content. So I just think it's so cool that these kids were like, well, we could read them, which is not something that a lot of people having these conversations are actually doing.
the logic. Your logic is insane. How dare you suggest that? You read the thing that you're trying to rally against. Thank you so much. Just really like an inspirational group of people. And your work really harkens back to this thing, right? Like consent and representation that like these children who are the most affected by this often don't have. So thank you for shining a light on that. Jassy, you're kind of like this opposite, right? Like you are the one who is going to be represented. You've made this art in this community and you had to decide to open up that space to Yanni. Like what was that process like for you and the rest of your community when somebody's coming in? Were you kind of like you have carte blanche, shoot whatever you want, do whatever you want, or did you have conversations around the way that you wanted your art to be represented?
Yeah, I think it was kind of scary for us because we had never experienced that. And also because we had done things so illegally, so DIY since the start of our organization, we were very nervous and apprehensive to let someone come in and like see the particulars of the ways in which we were doing things and organizing. So yeah, it was very scary. And we were also worried about, being represented in a certain way because we're used to putting on a show and letting people only see what we want them to see. They're definitely, when you have that many characters and that many, strong personalities in a room, there is a lot of tension when we're getting ready for a show, when we're, putting together something of that magnitude. So we were definitely nervous about having all those interpersonal relationships like reflected. But we did have conversations about that. And I think that the filmmakers were, for the most part, really respectful. And ultimately, they were able to show the like heart and the love that we all have for each other and how we're really just trying to create something beautiful for ourselves that our community can appreciate and relate to. And yeah, it ended up being, I think, a great experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Claudia, I think there's something really interesting because there's something kind of internal in the subject matter, right? This is something that you've grown up with, it's very close, but I think that it's presented throughout the film in a way that is incredibly relatable and open. So can you talk about kind of your approach to telling this story while opening it up to new audiences?
Yeah, I think my co-director Aoife and I, we've been really interested in themes of remembrance. Aoife thinks about remembrance as an act of celebration, and I think about it as a way of regaining autonomy to oneself, especially as Black girls. And so I think our entry point into creating Ampe was really about just that idea of remembrance and then bringing all these individual girls throughout the Ghanaian diaspora and the African diaspora together to share their individual experiences with the game. So it was really about, through remembrance, we can give access to other audiences, but also specifying that our first and foremost audience is Black girls throughout the diaspora. So I think that specificity is really what kind of creates this very intimate space while also allowing other people who may not be familiar with the game to be like almost participating bystanders, if you will, but then also still maintaining that fine line of like, this is our safe space and this is our story, and just really keeping that ownership. So I think remembrance was sort of just that through line to help us navigate the story.
I love that. I love that so much. I'm gonna like put that in my mental Pinterest board or whatever, but just like that ability to hold on and share through remembrance is really important. Thank you so much. George, sorry, I keep on like busting out my film theory education here.
I went to
coming back
Berkeley. It's okay. It's still in my
Yeah.
mind somewhere too.
Well, at UC Santa Cruz, I studied with a woman named
Yeah.
Shelley Stamp.
No.
Shelley Stamp is kind of the foremost scholar on Lois Weber, who is kind of the protege to Valinsky. And what Shelley talks about a lot is if you're looking through historical records of those who are not pale and male in the film industry, you kind of have to look at the absence, right?
Yeah.
Like these stories aren't readily available. I mean, they are now like through the work that you're doing and through the work that Shelley's done. but like, can you talk about your approach to research and
Mhm.
uncovering the uncoverable, I guess? Things
Yeah,
that weren't talked
no,
about?
no, that's a great point. I mean, post is known as an invisible art. And then you combine that with women in post, it's completely invisible, but it's there. And there are these incredible archivists out there, and there are these online sources. And during COVID, it was harder because a lot of them closed. But like, if you can start to do, like, I remember when I was in college, we had concordances where you had to look up word by word and find words as they were repeated. But now with online, it's so much easier. And you can look for that. And when you find something that's already online, the next step is to find out what wasn't digitized from that era. And at times it was very hidden. At times, again, those studio films in which you'd have these rooms of men and men working and men doing this, all white, of course. And then there'd be a little tiny snippet of the labor from women. So it was a combination of those two, but like, the research is wonderful, and it just becomes sort of like a bottomless pit of finding more. And again, as I was ending my book, I came upon them, and I just became fascinated by these women who were mentioned more in news articles than industry ones. And then they were mentioned a lot in technical journals, and some of the journals were praising their work. And again, they're always referred to as exchange girls, as a collective. And some were very, very critical. And then I just started to see in the 30s, they disappeared. So I wanted to find out what happened to that job and that position. And then I found these amazing women who turned that work into Oscar-winning careers. So it's just a wonderful team effort of archivists and archives and mystery work, I guess.
100%. I mean, maybe some of us have seen The Man with the Movie Camera, right? It's a very famous early Russian film, and
Yeah, very tall, sure.
you're kind of in this like juggernaut of motion within the movie camera, but there's like this moment where the film stops and you go into the editing room,
And it's
and
women.
there's the women, and so it really touched upon that for me. So thank you so much for your research
Sure.
and for telling the
Thank
story. Luis, can you talk about the way that you worked with your subjects and kind of collected the imagery for your film? I mean, it seems like it takes a lot of trust to allow somebody to record in in situations like that. So like, what was your approach to kind of building out the material and telling your story?
Yeah, I think that big responsibility goes to Yuri, my co-director. He researched graffiti tagging for like over 5-6 years, I don't know. And then he knows a lot about this subject. So it was, once we had the initial access to these taggers, like, it was really a process of gaining their trust, you know, like going continuously to their habitats and being there, and like without a camera. And like, I remember we stayed like around 6 months following Bruno around, which is our main character. For the first 2 months, we didn't even bring a camera. We were like just trying to know him, asking him questions. How was his process? How was what he had done? He had a huge history with tagging. Like, he tagged in Berlin, he tagged in Paris. He had like almost like a big Euro trip of tagging, you know. And then we just started to understand this and see the relevance he had in the tagging universe. And I think that what made him trust us was our interest in his work, you know, and just to see that we were only there for his story. Like, and I think that time shows that we weren't like trying to just get his story and then go and do a film about it and never talk to him again. Like, we see him over and over again, and we talk to him regularly. And I think that's, we had a very small budget for this film, and we had a very small crew as well, which helped us also get their trust. Like, we weren't multiple cameras, like multiple producers. It was basically me, Yuri, and our producer Pachi, which was following him around. So for the process of this film, it was like purely documental, and then we had some scenes in which we had already gained his trust enough so that we could reproduce it. For example, him walking around his hometown in the outskirts of São Paulo, or we have this conversation in which he talks about his fellow tagger, which died in COVID. And this was like one of the only scenes in the film that we really reproduced. Like, sit down here, let's talk about this. The rest was just our process of following him around, with the camera. And well, I think it was just this intimate process of trying to know the person before trying to do a film. I don't know, a little bit of this.
Something that seems so simple, but really does take a lot of patience and genuineness, and it really comes through in your work. So thank you so much.
Nice.
Well, everybody, that's all the time we have today. A huge thank you to our audience for tuning in and sharing these stories with us. And thank you so much to all of our filmmakers for allowing us to give a platform for them with DocFest. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for spreading the word of our films. So it's wonderful.
Take care, everybody.
Exactly. Thank you.